and unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understandings of the teachings and practice, it's offered on the basis of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this is done without the expectation of anything in return when the opportunity arises. And those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis, so please support their practice by giving what you can. You can go to greattreetemple.org, hit the support button, and make a note that it's for Genjo today. Our speaker today is Reverend Genjo Williams. Genjo is a student of Reverend Teijo Munnich in the Jikai Dainin Katagiri Roshi lineage of Soto Zen Buddhism. He started his practice in 2011. In 2023, Genjo ordained as a priest, and the following year practiced at Kotaiji and Toshoji Zen training monasteries. Genjo served as shuso, or head of practice, at Great Tree in 2025. Currently, he lives in Asheville, where he works as a counselor and psychotherapist, practices aikido, and continues his practice with Great Tree and the Zen Center of Asheville. And Genjo is shortly moving to Durham to practice. Were you practicing around Durham?
I'll be with Chapel Hill.
Chapel Hill, that's right. And the title of his talk today is Zazen, Community Ritual.
Hey, good morning. The title of this talk comes from something I read last year that really has stuck with me, and I have been kind of chewing on and sitting with since then. And it comes from an essay by Teigen Dan Layton, who's a scholar, monk, a scholar practitioner. And the title of his essay is Zazen as Enactment Ritual. And I first came across it in a book on Zen ritual. It's a collection of essays by different practitioners talking about their experience of ritual in Zen practice, and specifically in Soto Zen practice. Um, and you can find this essay online for free, Zazen as Enactment Ritual, if you're curious about it. It's relatively short, and I think it serves as a good introduction in many ways to some teachings by Dogen Zenji, because Taigen Dan Layton really draws from many different essays and fascicles by Dogen Zenji to kind of make this point that Zazen is what he says is communal ritual. So I changed it a little bit to community ritual. But I'll just read the passage, the paragraph where first uses this term. And I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but the first half of it. And he says, in Bendoho, Dogen states that all monks should sit zazen together when the assembly is sitting, and stop together when it is time for all to lie down for the night. He states that standing out has no benefit. Being different from others is not our conduct. And Taigen Dan Layton says, clearly Dogen sees Zazen as a communal ritual rather than an individual spiritual exercise. And so that piece at the end there is what really jumped out at me, and what I've been sitting with um, is seeing Zazen as communal ritual rather than an individual spiritual exercise. And for me, there's a lot there. There's so much yeah, there's just so much there to chew on, I think, and that there's so much there that for me is really important in my practice and in my mind. Um, I think being grown up and raised and situated in the our Western sociocultural context where there's so much emphasis on the individual and um, I really think from the moment we're born, there's this push towards becoming an individual. And then, being general here, but I think generally speaking, um, yeah, to in many ways, kind of the antithesis to what Dogen Zenji is saying here. There's this push to stand out, to be pioneering or innovative. Um, and there's nothing, of course, wrong with that. But again, I think using that as an opportunity to see my mind, see my kind of cultural conditioning and my patterns. And in a practice that emphasizes harmony and oneness, practicing this oneness, I think that's really important for me to see. Um, I've been reading this book, Buddhism and the Art of Psychotherapy, written by a Japanese psychoanalyst, psychotherapist. He was the first Jungian psychoanalyst in Japan. And he didn't really identify with Buddhism or realize how Buddhist he was until he left Japan and studied in the West. And he realized how much, I guess in a way, he had just been indoctrinated by Buddhist thinking, having grown up in Japan. And it becomes a really important practice for him or important aspect of himself. And he has this embodied koan of what does it mean to be a Buddhist and a Western psychoanalyst. And so that's what this book is about. He's kind of exploring that and talking about his own therapy practice and his own understanding of his self and his own ego, having being a Japanese person and having grown up in Japan and then experiencing the Western ego, having studied in the United States and in Switzerland. And in the beginning, he says something very interesting that I'd like to read. Um, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll just kind of enter us in here. And this is in the prologue. He says, we must, I think, examine varieties of ego consciousness. The modern Western ego has accomplished so many things that other cultures all over the world have been strongly influenced by it. However, in view of the fact that the strong modern ego tends to lose contact with the unconscious, it may be worthwhile to investigate ego consciousness in different cultures. As a Japanese, I would like to talk about the situation in my country. So he talks about earlier how he was invited to lecture at a conference in Japan. And so he says, at the party the evening before the initial Fei lecture, I began my speech with the following statement. It is said that a Japanese speaker on this kind of occasion tends to begin with apologies, whereas an American likes to begin with a joke. If I am a typical Japanese person, I have to begin by saying that I am not qualified to be a lecturer here and have no knowledge that allows me to talk about psychotherapy. I wondered why this difference exists and got the following interpretation. When people in Japan gather in one place, they share a feeling of unity, regardless of whether they have known each other before or not. One should not stand alone, separated from others. Therefore, when one becomes a speaker, one has to apologize, asserting that one is in no way different from others. In the West, however, even though people come together in one place, each person is separate from the others as an individual. Therefore, when one becomes a speaker, he or she or they like to begin with a joke, enabling all the people there by laughing together to experience a feeling of oneness. This example suggests a difference between the ego consciousness of the Japanese and that of Westerners. In the West, a person tries to establish an individual ego separate from others, and then tries to find ways to have relationships with others. In contrast, a Japanese person seems to establish a feeling of oneness first, and then tries to become an individual separate from others. Um, So whether that's right or not, or you agree with it, I think it's an interesting food for thought. And so he wrote this, or this was published, let's see, I think I want to say, yeah, 1996. So about 30 years ago. And of course, a lot has happened in this 30 years. There's been even more globalization, even more exchange between East and West, Japan and the United States, the whole world. And so I wonder what that is doing too to our understanding of ourselves, and how we're being more and more influenced by each other. I think less and less maybe extreme, as we're being exposed to different thoughts, different cultural beliefs, different cultural values. Um, but anyway, I thought that was just interesting. And I know my experience in Japan, one thing is so um, I enjoy about it so much is I do feel in many ways that it's kind of opposite uh, um, how I was raised here, the way we move through the world and what uh yeah, what we've been taught to value and how we've been taught to show up in relationship to others and to our own selves. And so I think there's so much there in terms of thinking about moving towards balance and practicing the middle way. I think there's so much, I think, benefit in this cross-cultural exchange. Um, Forgot where I was going with that, if anywhere. Um, I guess back to this idea that of Zazen as community ritual, not as a individual spiritual exercise. Um, what I'm realizing too is that there's so many ways to talk about Zazen, and there's so many different definitions of it. And the majority of them, I would say, avoid or even intentionally reject this idea that Zazen is meditation. In the Fukan Zazengi, Dogen Zenji says outright, the Zazen I speak of is not meditation practice. It is simply the Dharma gate of repose and bliss, or sometimes translated as the Dharma gate of ease and joy. Um, and he talks about it in different ways and different texts. He talks about it as transformation through free play, yuge. Um, he talks about it, of course, as just sitting. Um, He talks about it as practice realization of totally culminated awakening. He talks about it as the decorous activity of practice after realization. Realization is simply just sitting zazen. One of his last teachings he gave to his assembly in 1252 was he said, "A flower blooming on a monk's staff has merit. Smiling on our sitting cushions, there's nothing lacking." He encourages us to disport and play freely with spiritual penetration. Um, and this comes from, he talks about four different styles of teaching and how he teaches the assembly. And one of them is, he says, sometimes I simply just encourage the monks to disport and play freely with spiritual penetration. So back to, again, this idea of Zazen as community ritual, not as an individual exercise, individual spiritual exercise. Um, I think if nothing else, I find that helpful. Um, I know I can get caught up in um, this gaining mind, thinking that I'm sitting in order to achieve something else, in order to achieve anything other than what's already here, right? Um, and so this idea as it's simply another way of practicing together, of embodying, this innate harmony that exists, but that I can lose track of, you know. And thinking about in the monastery in Japan, I went in, as did most Westerners, thinking that, there was the emphasis was really going to be on Zazen, and we'd really just sit and sit and sit and sit. And of course, Zazen was important. I was trying to think if there was a day that we didn't sit, and I don't remember that there was. Sometimes we would sit less or sit more, depending on the day and the schedule, what was happening. Um, but Zazen just came and became another thing that we do. There was no more or less, my experience was it was no more or less important than brushing our teeth together, than eating together, working together, sleeping together, bathing together. It was just another way of being together, an important way, right? Because of course, as sitters, we know um, that there's a difference before and after we sit, an important difference. Um, our pre-Zazen selves and our post-Zazen selves, which of course once we really think about it, there's no difference, right? It's all continuous. And I think that's what this kind of almost like a leveling or approaching Zazen with a non-discriminating mind, not elevating it as any more important than anything else that we do, um, help to see that in a way, to see this continuity of practice, and that every moment is practice realization. Every moment there awakening exists. We just have to return to it, you know. Everything is Buddha nature, as Dogen Zenji says. We don't have to get it or achieve it. It just is. And we're part of that everything, you know. Um, and what was some interesting context for me that Taigen Dan Leighton talks about in this essay um, is um, he talks about some of the kind of pre-Dogen Zenji world of Buddhism in Japan, that for me was um, yeah, interesting and elucidating in a way, kind of maybe Dogen Zenji's approach. Um, but he talks about how during the Heian period of Japan, so a few hundred years before Dogen Zenji was born, Shingon Buddhism and Tendai Buddhism were really the most prevalent practices. And how in both of these schools, um, Shingon is really the Mikyo, it's called in Japanese, the Vajrayana school that exists in Japan. But how even in Tendai, um, there was an emphasis on might be called guru or deity meditation practice, where the practice is to see yourself as a particular guru or deity or bodhisattva. You're becoming that. You're not externalizing whomever, teacher or Avalokiteshvara or the Buddha, but the practice is to recognize that we are those, you know. Um, and then jump forward a few hundred years when Dogen Zenji is training before he goes to China, um, and comes across Shikantaza. He's training at Mount Hiei and Rakuji in the Tendai school. And so even though Dogen Zenji goes to China and really is becomes a firm believer in Zazen or Shikantaza, he still had that Tendai training, in his very early on in his Buddhist practice. Um, and for me, that's a helpful to maybe think about that, um, is helpful in terms of not necessarily understanding, because it's not. it's not about understanding. I think it's good to approach Zazen not understanding or not knowing what it is, so that it can be what it is, rather than just what I think it is, which is just my own mind, putting my own limitations on what my practice is, rather than going in, not knowing what to expect when I sit, not knowing what's going to happen or what this practice is. Um, but thinking about Zazen, like Taigen Dan Layton says, as enactment ritual, as we're taking on the posture of Buddha because we are Buddha. We've just forgotten or it's gotten covered up. Um, and when we just sit, it's an opportunity to return to our innate Buddha-ness, Buddhahood that exists, that just is, um, nothing to get or nothing to do. Sitting Zazen is it's enough, you know. Um, at one point, he says, Dogen Zenshi says, know that Buddhas in the Buddha way do not wait for awakening. For me, that's helpful guidance too, in terms of I know how often I can sit waiting for something to happen, or kind of whether I realize it or not, I can have this kind of background thought or belief that, well, once I do this thing, then I'll wake up. Once I sit enough or go through this ritual or have this experience, then I'll wake up. And that very waiting mind becomes the obstacle, the very obstacle to to realizing the wakefulness that's already here. Bless you. So again, back to Zazen as community ritual. Um, we have the forms. We step in and bow, and we bow to our cushion and to the Sangha. And how all of that, I think, is just an extension or an expression of Zazen, once we really, if we let it be, once we really think about it. There's not, there's no settling into Zazen. Zazen is just here with us. Um, and I think the forms help us to see that and practice that, help us to practice that oneness that already exists, that we're a part of, and that we yearn for because we forget that it's already here. We forget that we're already a part of it. This idea too, this Zazen as community ritual, um, also brought me to Thich Nhat Hanh's um, belief or teaching that the next Buddha is Sangha. And so I'd like to read a few excerpts from a transcription of a talk that he gave um, at Spirit Rock in 1993, late October 1993, it turns out. So a few weeks after I was born early October 1993. Um, and I came across this transcription of a talk he gave. This was a day of mindfulness at Spirit Rock. He says, I'm just gonna it's pretty short. You can also find it online and it might be worth reading, but I'm gonna just share some excerpts. It was difficult to discriminate and figure out what to share. Um, but I did. So he says, the Buddha body is, I can't read my own writing. Um, here we go. Nope. Yes. The Buddha body is in us using the energy of mindfulness. We can touch the body of the Buddha within us and around us at any time. And I know the Sangha body is in me and around me, the trees, the grass, the blue sky, The flowers are all elements of my Sangha, and you are my Sangha body. You take care of me. If a Sangha is available in your area, please keep in touch and take refuge there. If the Sangha doesn't have the quality you expect, don't abandon it. Do not look for a perfect Sangha. Stick to the one you have and try, with your practice and your joy and peace, to improve its quality. This is very important. The blue sky and the beautiful trees are also members of your Sangha. Our practice should be supported by the people around us, and we can learn how to support them in return. We support them by looking deeply so we can recognize the seeds of peace, joy, and loving kindness in them. We touch these seeds, we water these seeds every day in order to make other persons bloom like flowers. And when these persons bloom like flowers, we all become happier. We have to help each other in our practice. The practice of meditation is not an individual matter. We have to do it together. It is possible the next Buddha will not take the form of an individual. The next Buddha may take the form of a community practicing understanding and loving kindness, a community practicing mindful living. And the practice can be carried out as a group, as a city, as a nation. So again, I think he might agree with Dogen Zenji in this case that Zazen is not individual spiritual exercise, but community ritual. It's a way of being together in the world, a way of embodying peace, of embodying non-discrimination and sharing that with others. Um, a new Sangha was just started in Greenville, South Carolina, and I went and sat with them during their first sitting. Um, and it was a full room. There were maybe about 30 people. Um, and there were even at one point 2 rows that needed to be created. We were kind of sitting on the perimeter of the room. Um, so there was a really great enthusiasm. And there was a guy sitting there, and he shared at the end that it was his first time. He had been sitting for a long time, um, but it was his first time sitting with people, with other people. And he remarked at how different of an experience it was. Um, And I've had that experience too. The first several years of my practice, I kind of came in and out different sanghas. I was moving around a lot to different cities. Um, and so I would sometimes sit with people, but mostly sat on my own. Um, and it's good, I think, always just to sit, but it is a very different experience to sit with people. And I think ultimately a very helpful experience, because there is something about sitting together and opening the hand of thought, and again just allowing the natural support of all beings to be with us, and then in turn we're naturally sharing our own energy and effort with everyone. I'm sitting here and experiencing, yeah, the energy of the room, but then also the cicadas. I really hear the cicadas buzzing and Kiku breathing. Um, and how that energy is always around us, you know, kind of inviting us to the present moment, inviting us to the oneness, you know. Um, I've been really um, just returning to listening, as a practice to kind of bring me back throughout my day. And it kind of dawned on me sitting this morning of how I experienced this non-discriminatory listening, where everything was just one, that wasn't listening for anything in particular, but just listening, and experienced my own thoughts, the movement in the room, the movement outside of the room, the cicadas, all as one. There was no um, just listening at one particular thing, there was this natural harmony, here that is always here. Just looking to see if there's anything else I wrote down that I'd like to say. I guess the last thing is also, I think, Zazen as community ritual. Um, there's also the opening up to the physical community here, but there's also, um, I think sitting opens us up to the community of ancestors and of myth and of deities and bodhisattvas across space and time, um, so that it's not just me here and my limited way of thinking, but when I sit or when I open up to Zazen, um, I'm opening up to all beings across space and time, and I think we all have probably had that experience of, yes, something unexpected or someone unexpected coming through, you know. And that's another gift of Zazen, this recognition that um,
I seem to be. I mean, Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. If you could please mute yourself during the ceremony, we'd appreciate that.
this is from my computer. That sounded like Chimyo
It sounded like Gino and Anne.
and Anne.
Is that the whole group over there?
Did you all hear that? Well, I think that was from a previous talk Chimyo was giving, so right on cue. Someone unexpected comes through across time, right? Um, yeah.
It's a live call.
A live call?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Huh. Well, I'll stop there. Seems like something else wants to come through. What'd you say? Oh, yeah. What happens if I mute?
Very good.
Yeah.
On the speaker?
Yeah.
That's good. Are you playing a video on your computer about it?
It's a video going on.
I
Can
don't
you
know.
press this pause button? Does anything happen?
No.
There's a ghost.
What if you mute yourself? Oh, you tried that already.
Oh, when you mute up there, it goes away. Now I lost everyone. Is everyone still here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there you're back. Okay, well, if anyone has anything they'd like to share.
I have a thought that's maybe less about the community part, more about the ritual part. But like thinking of Zaz, like when I think of the word ritual in Zen, I think of like the chants that we do and the bells and all this type of stuff, right? And I feel like I think of Zazen as being apart from that somehow because it's just so like basic. But putting in the context of like a ritual is helpful for my understanding of the other rituals that we do, because whenever I try to like intellectualize the idea of ritual in spiritual practice, it never works out. I'm trying to understand what we're doing, and I'm trying to understand, whatever it is. And it's like recently I've been trying to get more comfortable with the idea of just like, touching the earth whenever I'm trying to think about things too much, and just be like, no, just be here and just sit. And it's like whenever you try to think of something as a ritual and try to understand it too much, it's just, which I've been trying to do this whole time as you've been talking, I'm trying to think about like, okay, well, what does this mean? What is it? And it's just like, no, just like, be here.
Mm.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. My experience too of like more of the kind of, oh, this is clearly a ritual thing, the chanting and different ceremonies in Japan was that by just doing them, the kind of meaning over time starts to come through, and had this experience at the end of my time in Japan at the monastery where I had been in almost every role except for really. Um, and so, and we do pretty much the same morning chants every day, with different, sometimes a few more, sometimes less, but there were certain elements that were always there. And I kind of realized when I was doing a certain role in the ceremony, I was only understanding the ceremony from that particular role. And so over time, as I got to literally see the ceremony from different angles, because depending on your role, you're positioned differently. But to play a different role, I started to kind of gain a more holistic understanding of really what was happening. But again, it's like you were just saying, coming from embodying it and like kind of getting out of the intellectual thinking mind and just kind of trusting, the earth, that you touching the earth or whatever you do. And that over time, kind of the meaning comes through. And even if it doesn't, that doesn't have to, we still, just the very act of doing it, I think is enough, you know. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I say understand. I mean, I was starting to, I won't even say that I was there for a short amount of time, so there's only so much. But I started to understand um, that I was starting to understand, I guess.
Thank you, Genjo, for sharing your insights and experiences. Can you hear me okay? Everything? Okay. Um, you started off with Zazen has a lot of different interpretations, definitions, experiences, and and you touched on it again through it. And I think it's so hard because Zazen is a process, as we know, like life, it's a process. And it's always unfolding. And in my experience, what it was yesterday or a long time ago, it's different. It just keeps taking on new shapes and forms, um, and I think it's just where we find ourselves through it, and particularly in community, it's like it's cultivated on on such deep levels. To your points, and I didn't realize it at the time. It was that Zazen was this. It was just this at that time. And 2 years later, it's just this. And 5 years later, it's just this. And it's all of those things, as you were saying, just like when we come into the dojo or the sendo temple. And it just so unfolds. And then it's, before we know it, it's in life. We're recognizing Zazen in life, not sitting. And how'd that happen? Zazen is sitting meditation, but it's so much more. It's so much more. And as Thich Nhat Hanh just understood that, and community beyond, as you pointed out, of course. So thank you for the sharing and insights.
Mhm.
And it is,
Can you speak up?
Yeah.
I think they can hear you.
Can y'all hear? No, yeah,
okay.
please speak up.
Togen Zenji, I say it,
Zenji?
Zenji.
Yes.
Um, says that Zazen is not meditation. I was just wondering if you could expound on that and if he said something else is meditation or what, I mean, I'm assuming the word meditation also has a specific translation for him. And I'm just wondering if you could just give a little more insight into the language used there and what that means.
Yeah.
That's my first question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can I'll start by saying, yeah, I'm limited in my understanding. Because by the time I'm reading that in English, it's been translated from classical Chinese to Japanese to different versions of English, you know. Um, and so I can't really say for sure what exactly he was pointing to. Um, but my gut says is that um because this is coming, he says it in different texts, but what I was referring to was in the Fukan Zazengi, where he's universal recommendations for Zazen, where he's going step by step and explaining both the physical posture of Zazen, but then also the kind of um, conceptual what it is and what it isn't. And my sense is that he was encouraging us not to get caught up in just seeing it as a meditation technique, which of course, I mean, for me, when I hear meditation, it automatically conjures up an image of maybe what should be happening and what it looks like, and just it kind of immediately limits what it is. And he emphasizes throughout the text just the importance of just sitting, just sitting. There's nothing else to be done, nothing, And I think at the time, too, if we think about his sociocultural context, there was all different schools of Buddhism in Japan with all different teachings, and different meditation strategies. And so I think there's also kind of a response to that and what he was bringing back from China of saying like, no, you're doing all this extra stuff, but it's already all here. Everything is Buddha nature, suchness. We already are awakened. There's nothing to do. So just sit, and let that emerge. Let that kind of anyway, that's what I can offer. But I'm sure there are scholars, and I think of Shohaku Okumura Roshi, who maybe has written on this more. He's really amazing at how he's able to translate Dogen Zenji for us. So he could probably provide more insight into what he was saying and the intentionality of the language there.
But even in Japan, they're still translating the Fukan Zazen.
Right.
Because it was written, that was the one thing that he wrote in classical Chinese.
Right.
But one of the things I was thinking as you were speaking is that in the translation that I'm familiar with, he says, Zazen is not learning meditation.
Mm. Mm.
And I wonder
Mm.
if that might be sort of pointing to that it's not something that we're learning how to do, it's something that we just are present in.
Mm-hmm.
Because then he goes on to say, it is Dharma gate of repose and bliss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And that sort of points to shikantaza,
Yeah. Right, you're just sitting.
just sitting.
Mm.
Second question was in this Greenville.
Can't hear you.
My second question is in the Greenville Sangha, were there children?
There weren't.
Okay.
Yeah, that was like we met for lunch afterwards and talked about that.
These two
That-
families who come up here from Greenville for family meditation somewhat regularly.
Yeah.
So like, I think there's a desire for that. If, do y'all live in Greenville too?
No,
Okay.
I guess my thing is, I just get the sense, you can speak to this if you want, but that it would be nice to have a group of children who like really wanted to meditate for hours. Like she could meditate for a long time and or sit for a long time, whatever we call that. And also just like spend days in their practice. And I'm just curious if there is anywhere in the US where, you know, we might visit and see children really practicing with like in a deep way.
You did just do a family retreat, which you just missed.
Yes, I've been to that.
Yeah.
With another about. So I think it was when we were maybe and Aurora was little. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
Yeah. That was, you know, it's as they're emerging, they're really open to this is Greenville Sangha opening to they're open to different ways of doing things. But that's something that came up is how do we include children in the practice? And there was a discussion on different ways to do that. Of course, we do family meditation here every month.
And the retreat was once a year.
Mhm.
It was in early June.
It's been
Mhm.
like not in town.
Mhm.
Thank you.
But yeah, I know other centers will like do kind of separate sittings sometimes, where they'll have the adults sitting and then someone go with the kids and do like their own practice. But yeah, I think it's an important question. I think, you know, the intergenerational piece is really important and to me speaks to a really healthy community. You know, when there's children and elders and middle-aged folks and young folks all sharing together, sharing space together. Um, the first monastery I trained at in Japan, Kotaiji, um, right in the center was a daycare. And so we'd be sitting Zazen and we'd hear the laughter and play of children. That was a really huge part of the practice. And there were monks who lived there, and their whole job was to be with the kids and do daycare, do school.
Daycare either. They
Yeah,
do
it was. Yeah, I say daycare, but it was, yeah, it's not daycare. It was being with kids, and there was school, but there was meditation, there was play, there was mathematics, you know.
If I could, I'd really like to take us back to what Teijo said. Um, it's of vital importance. Ito. Hi.
She's listening.
What Teijo was bringing out there about just sitting, to understand what she was saying in there, because that in itself can be so confusing about the physical just sitting or just being everything sitting. It's all right there, as she said. That's my experience, what Teijo shared with us, that wisdom. And it is of vital importance to really sit with that thought that she shared. And perhaps, Teijo, you could share it again for folks like me that need to hear it again. Please.
Oh, okay. He asked that if you share what you said again about learning meditation and just sitting.
Oh. Well, I was just saying that translation of the Fukan Zazengi that I'm familiar with. It's translated as Zazen is not learning meditation, it is the Dharma gate of repose and bliss. And to me, what that means is, what that might mean is that it's not something that we're learning to do. It is something that we just are present in. Shikantaza means just sit. And I always say, Shikantaza means just resisting the compulsion to do something. Because we sit there and we always think we want to do something, but if we can, it's like Thich Nhat Hanh talks about taking a walk without a destination. And he points out that at first, when you try to take a walk without a destination, you have to resist that temptation to have a destination. And I think that's what Shikantaza is too. So I never really understood. Katagiri Roshi used to say Zazen isn't meditation. And I didn't understand what that meant, but if you look at the Fukan Zazengi, that particular translation, not learning meditation, that's different. That's different from just sitting.
Do you think Katagiri Roshi meant something different? Something else?
I don't know. I mean, and maybe it was the way I heard it. You know, that's what I heard. And I used to think, why does he say that? You know, why did he say Zazen is not meditation? But maybe he said it's not learning meditation, and I just didn't pick up on that. I don't know.
The other thing that's weird about this, like this translation thing, is just like it almost requires you to define what meditation is. Like if you're talking about like Zazen and meditation, you're discriminating between them. So like, are we saying meditation is something different than like I feel like when we talk about Shikantaza, we talk about it in a very different way than like a lot of, for instance, Westerners talk about meditation, which is often like gainful, you know? And it's like Zazen is not meditation because Zazen is not trying to do something. It's not trying to focus on something. It's not trying to do XYZ. It's just
There's no object.
there's no object. You just are. You're just, you know. It's like
Yeah, and I think what Genjo said too is probably true, and that is, you know, Dogen, when he first went to the monastery, he was sent to a Tendai monastery, and in Tendai, it's a combination of lots of different practices. It's not just Kantaza or just, and he does mention in one of his writings that Zazen is not about mantras and about, you know, doing things. You know, he's not saying that those things are wrong. He's just saying that's not what Zazen is. So I think maybe what Genjo was pointing to is probably part of what caused Dogen to think about Zazen in that way. Because it was very, even in China, he picked up Shikantaza in China, but that was not usual. It was koan's practice, and there was, I think Tendai came from China. This kind of combination of different practices.
Something about, oh. I feel like I was thinking about when we were talking about just sitting in community, is like I feel like to realize for me, to realize that like Teijo and Genjo and a lot of people who practice here and helped this place exist for the last like few decades, and even before that, like Teijo's teacher and just a lot of people who've helped Great Tree exist. It's like that's a community that like basically created a place where we're allowed to just sit without, and I feel like for me I can't think of like any other part of my life where like I don't feel like there's like a specific like expectation on me to like achieve something or like be something. And I feel like it's like really like touching honestly to think about that, like for people to create a space that like your true nature is like understood or like seen as like valuable. Like I feel like it makes me cry like sometimes, like because I just think that's like so touching and beautiful, like that there's value in that. And it doesn't mean that it's like that I always am like enjoying it or like find it comfortable or that there are other parts of being a songbird that are like expectation or something. But I do think to value just like pure being with no like goal is like very like life affirming and like validating and like generous and stuff. That's just like my perception of just sitting, as well as like the community element, which is like everyone coming together to create a space where you can just sit.
Can I just add to that? I'm just remembering that my definition of meditation really was shaped by what Teijo taught me when I was 18. And 18. And so it was helpful to hear that the word might mean something different to Dogen Zenji and to Katagiri Roshi, and then it just reminded me of what you said last week from that sort of iteration on a Rumi poem of like, I wonder why I ever thought to use language. That's all.
I would like to quickly share this, please. I think what Dogen perhaps might have brought back from China was the deep understanding of what Thich Nhat Hanh refers to, that each of you have been highlighting in different ways, all of you. And that is what you are looking for is already in you. You already are everything that you are seeking. Just sit. It's all there. Thich Nhat Hanh.
It's a very old Buddhist thinking. Sherry Huber says she named one of her books, "That which you are seeking is what is causing you to seek."
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's 11:05. Shall we wrap up?
I have a few announcements. So tomorrow there's an intro to Zen class that's on Zoom only at 10:30. And then kind of like over the next week, the big thing that's happening is next Sunday, the 26th, we're having an Obon festival. So, remembering loved ones and ancestors. So today and next Saturday, there will be a graveyard cleaning during the work periods. And then next Saturday, the Dharma talk will be Haru Yokote. And the title of their talk is What is Obon? So if you're interested, definitely come to that talk. And then that Sunday, the festival will involve like making a remembrance altar, having tea and sweets, making the cucumber and eggplant vehicles, and then there will be a potluck of sorts as well. So if you're interested in coming to any of the work periods, I guess the work period next Saturday, or being involved in Obon, send me an email, info@greattreetemple.org.
Thank you. Would you do us the honors?
May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings.
benefit all beings and bring peace. Thank you. I'll do 3 prostrations and then we'll close.
Would you like me to use to do the bells?
Oh, could you? Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry.